This is a download from BFM 89.9, the business station.
It is 6:06 in the evening, and as you've heard, the government recently introduced FundMyHome, a crowdfunding platform meant to be an alternative home financing solution to banks. And while it, sounds like a great idea on paper, it has prompted some concerns, including that it might lead to a mortgage crisis.
But before we get into all that, what exactly is FundMyHome? This private scheme is developed by Edge Props and Berhad in what they claim is a first-in-the-world home ownership scheme.
So how this works is private developers will build the house and then buyers need to pay only 20% of the property price, while the balance would be contributed by participating institutions who would then get a share of future profits if the home appreciates.
And after 5 years, the buyer can opt to sell the house or remain by refinancing the home using the FundMyHome scheme or a normal bank mortgage.
So back to those concerns though, property consultancy Knight Frank Malaysia have said that authorities need to be vigilant in checking the profiles of first home buyers and fund managers to prevent the mortgage crisis that hit the US over too easy lending. And all this has, prompted us to ask you. We're going to be getting into this with Dr. Carmelo Ferlito. He's a senior fellow from Ideas a little bit later. But before that, we would also like to hear from you. Would you participate in FundMyHome? And I suppose it's fair as fair, Kelvin. We should answer these questions first. Would you?
I'm not sure, because the next question we actually want to ask you is owning a home important to you? Because to me at the moment, I'm okay with renting for the rest of my life. And I think it's because right now it just seems very unrealistic for me to actually buy a house.
Right. But if it weren't unrealistic, would you want a house?
Maybe, but it's really difficult to see right now for me to own a home. What if I want to move again in the future? Does that mean I have to buy another house? But that might not be such a bad thing because, a home can both be something you want to live in and also something you want to invest in as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes this is also a generational gap. I remember my parents telling me that, and for my parents, I think buying our house, the one that I grew up in,
right,
it was so tremendously important. And they always used to tell me, if you can, buy a house. It's a great investment. Buy a house that you want to live in. And I remember even from a young age thinking, what if I don't want to buy a house? And I do think that there is this generational gap where buying a house used to be seen as sort of a pinnacle of financial success. And now for many people, it's more like, well, I don't know if that is still, on my list. Yeah,
and the values are changing, right? It's like, get married, buy a house, have kids. But those three aren't really in the top priority for many people anymore, I think.
So we've been asking you those questions. You can weigh in, let us know. Would you participate in FundMyHome? And, for that matter, is owning a home important to you? You can call us 77332900. You can WhatsApp us 018-789-8899. Tweet us at BFM Radio. We have some messages. KF says, FundMyHome was designed to reduce the overhang property inventories and encourage property buyers to launch more new projects. Hence, does it benefit the rakyat or property developers who are making fat margins? And that is yet another concern that has been raised by analysts also.
And I think that's something we will be addressing with Dr. Ferlito later as well.
Yes. Miza says, if I have 20%, might as well get the normal housing loan. Why should I go P2P? And that actually,
also a very fair concern.
Yes, and that mirrors a conversation that we were having actually, before the show, where we were saying, yes, that's true. If you had that money, maybe you just go the traditional way. And
is this really a home ownership scheme as opposed to an investment scheme?
Yeah. To has sent us a link to how China's peer-to-peer lending crash is destroying lives. You can read that on Bloomberg.com. And he adds, be careful of P2P lending. And that's a very, very fair point as well. We do have other messages that have come in, including from Sharizal, who says, FundMyHome is a rich man's game. Put 20% to speculate on price hike after 5 years. What if after 5 years the investor and bank want to exit? Everyone's selling, but there's no buyer. The bank will start to lelong, do fire sales. To start with, this is not helping people get a house. 10% down payment is already high. What else? 20. Further checking has found that property prices in FundMyHome, the web price is already inflated compared to other web listings. Why must we help developers unload their unsold units, let the market decide, and force developers to correct their pricing?
I agree.
That's the thing. So it's it's one thing for it to be seen as a business endeavor. You know, if it were pushed as, hey, this is what we're going to be doing, that's great. But how it's being sold to us at the moment, it would appear, is it's supposed to be something that benefits us. And that seems to be where some of the friction is arising from.
And it's also a bit uncomfortable for me that this is, I guess, in some way endorsed by the government, because the government did launch this with mind that, yeah, you know, this is a good scheme. We want to use the scheme to help people own their first homes, but I don't know.
Faisal says, the housing loan sounds too good to be true. Frankly, I'm staying away from things that I'm not sure of. Gadi says, FundMyHome is a good start to look into a viable model to help first-time home buyers, but it's not going to take off as it will require a lot of education on both buyers and sellers. 80% to be funded by banks or investors at a 5% profit over 5 years with the option to sell or buy it. How is the buyer going to afford to buy it after the 5-year period, especially with the capital increase?
And it also sounds like you're giving loans to people who couldn't afford to get loans from banks in the first place.
And therein lies the fear, right? That you might end up kind of putting people in a position of indebting themselves further. Lam says we need to try out the scheme in a controlled manner. Don't preempt it. Either it will be doomed or it's going to be, amazing. These people are like fortune tellers. If kena, then okay. Not kena, tak apa. They don't take any responsibility. I understand that we have to. I understand that there is that premise of we should give it a go, but I also think it's worthwhile if we're talking about things like properties and houses and large amounts of money being spent. I think it's okay to be a bit circumspect.
Yeah. I just don't think this will pan out very well, because if the budget is meant to this time help the people, then why does it seem and smell like it's meant to help property developers instead?
So there is that concern. Let us know what you think. Are you going to be participating in FundMyHome? Are you comfortable with that? And for that matter, does it still matter to you to own a home? You can call us at 77332900. Okay, we have got some callers on the line. We've got Vini. Good evening, Vini. What are your thoughts?
Hi, good evening.
Hello.
Hello, hi. I think we will do a disservice to prospective first-time home buyers, as well as, home buyers in general, because clearly this scheme is, I believe, would benefit the property developers more. What the government of the day should really be doing is trying to figure out how to lower property prices. I think that is what is needed, not offloading expensive houses or offloading properties that no one can afford, right?
Right.
And then we're just putting the risk further ahead, and really that's a disservice to anyone, right? Especially first-time home buyers. And as I said, I think what the government of the day should really be doing is trying to figure out how to lower property prices and how to ensure that if someone wanted to buy a house, it is affordable.
Would you sign up for this program?
No, I won't.
Fair enough.
It does not make sense. It does not make financial sense on both sides, right? So I think the only person that will benefit here is the property developer, because he gets to offload his property, and, I've washed my hands. So who's left in the party really is the buyer and the other, the peer on the other side.
Yeah, no, Vini, I completely agree. Thank you so much for calling. Let's see if Azman agrees. Good evening, Azman. What are your thoughts?
Hi, good evening. I am not sure how the system works for that home buying programs, but what I can understand, it helps those small-time buyers or whoever wants to own the house with small amount. Even if they don't have any initial deposit amount, they can make a small loan, and with that they can use it as a deposit for a portion that they're covering. But I'm not sure how, because on those other individuals who want to participate, want to make an investment on it, they most likely will be very selective on which area they want to participate. So it is a disadvantage to the buyer, the so-called owner just now. And again, I'm also not sure how that in the future, if let's say the owner decided to sell it off and have to move on, how is that arrangement? So in a way, overall, I'm not really keen of that program. But I foresee it helps for those who doesn't have much money to start with. And with that, I myself, I used to because this thing that owning a house is important. I'm the older generation, but now I think renting is good as owning it as well, because you get a lot of benefits of just renting. So you don't have to stack up your assets or whatever. When you own the house, you think you are so feeling comfortable with that house, and you tend to buy many things and put it there, and then end up, you may not use it over time. But if you just rent it, you'll be very cautious on what you want to buy, and you put it into a house, and you plan it properly. I think that's a good advantage for renting on it.
Azman, I'm just curious, in your own sort of personal financial life, I suppose, is buying a house or is, home ownership just still hugely important to you? Or is it something that you think, no, I would like to put my eggs in another basket maybe?
Yeah, that's right. Because nowadays people have many constraints on earning enough incomes to support their means. So that's why if they don't have enough, then they have other priorities to allocate the money. But if they have more income, so sufficient income to own, they can consider putting the money into other investment or other options, not just on properties only. Maybe owning one house is enough. The rest, they should not start adding more properties as an investment, but they should consider other way of investment.
Azman, thank you so much for calling and for sharing your thoughts. You can keep them coming. Let us know what you think. Will you be participating in Fund My Home? And is home ownership still very important to you? 77332900 is the number to call. WhatsApp us at 018-789-8899. Tweet us at BFM Radio. Anal says, I think Maybank's rent to own is a far better idea. The government should coax other banks to get involved, perhaps make funds available for the loans. Penalties for cheaters must be heavy to prevent abuse.
Actually, if I'm not wrong, I think Maybank and CIMB Group are participating partners in this Fund My Home scheme. But I'm not sure how that will take place. I think they are part of the two banks that will provide the 80% financing for Fund My Home.
I haven't looked into it, but if Maybank's rent-to-own is a better scheme, then I'm curious as to why they would be participating in another. Yeah. Kevin says, this is not going to be popular. I think the government shouldn't interfere with the property market. Let the burden of owning a home be a motivation, or rather a cane, to make us Malaysians work harder. If some of us have to struggle, bleed, sweat and cry for a house, why shouldn't the others be tasting the hardship? Why should they be looked after? I'm not referring to races here, more about the B40 group. And I think the answer there, Kevin, lies in the fact that more often than not, poverty is a trap and it's a cycle. Yeah,
I mean, I can partially agree with the fact that perhaps the government shouldn't interfere with the property market, but what the government can do is, I know recently they raised the minimum wage to 1,100 ringgit, but they could really do more. They could really do better to increase our wages. And that's always the main cause of why people can't buy homes. They just don't have enough money. I also don't think we should imply, for me personally, that the B40 are not also struggling, bleeding and sweating and crying for a house. It's just that perhaps their place at the starting line was a little bit further back. But thank you for those thoughts. I mean, that is relevant also, this notion, I think, that the government shouldn't interfere with the property market, but also that the burden of owning a home should rest really on a private citizen and a private citizen alone. Thanath says, looks like the lobbyists have worked their magic on Tun and Lim Guan Eng. Anyway, if you purchased a home conventionally by putting down 10% and you assume a 5% appreciation yearly, you will walk away with a much higher profit at the end of 5 years. Fund My Home feels more like a rip-off as of now. By the way, where's the logic? They claim this is to help the people who are being rejected by the banks in their loan application to secure the 20%. Inevitably, some will resort to loans. This is a crisis in the making. However, we
aren't exactly property experts. We have to say that.
Yeah, so we don't know. So we fortunately managed to get a property expert, and we have him on the line with us. He's Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, Senior Fellow at the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs. That's IDEAS. He joins us right now. Carmelo, can you help break down a bit further what the scheme is all about and how it works?
Yes, in simple terms, for what I understood going through the website of the scheme, it seems that you can move toward the purchase of a house by having at disposal 20% of the total amount. And other investors would eventually come in with the rest of the amount, with the left 80%. However, and this needs to be clearly understood, de facto, you are not really the owner. After 5 years, you have to decide if you want to pay back the 80% of the amount and therefore becomes the full owner of that property, or to sell it out and pay back the investors in this way.
Okay, so just to clarify that, right now there are only two options at the end of the 5-year period. Either you sell it or you pay the rest of the 80%?
Yes, but of course the important thing that needs to be understood, you will become the real and full owner of that property only after you have paid the remaining 80%. So there was probably some confusion among the first subscriber in what they stated on the press after the launch in Semigny. You can't buy your home with just 20% of the amount. This is indeed, as some newspaper titled, too good to be true. You pay now 20% and you have to be ready to pay the rest, the other 80% in 5 years' time. If you have the money available or with a loan, whatever, but if you want to become the owner, you still have to pay the full amount.
Who do you think will likely sign up for the program?
I think that if the program will be properly understood, and of course this will depend also how the scheme will be communicated and delivered to the people, the right people that would sign up are the ones that have a certain propension to risk, of course, because after 5 years you have either to bear an eventual profit if the property value went up or to bear a loss if it went down. Somehow you don't know in advance what is going to happen in 5 years to the value of that property. So you are assuming a risk which is higher compared to the risk that traditionally you take when you buy a property with a traditional loan, with a traditional mortgage, because there the value is fixed. So you know, even with a loan that will last 30 years, you know in advance how much will be your total payout.
Right. So I guess this makes it more like an investment scheme, as we talked about a little bit earlier.
Yes, I agree with this perspective. It's more an investment scheme that, of course, as all the investment schemes can attract people that do investment by profession rather than people that are really looking at buying their first property.
So ultimately then, do you see this as being helpful in terms of enabling potential homeowners to afford houses?
I see it as an interesting scheme, but I don't see it solving the problem of people that can't afford a house now. I don't see really a radical change in the possibility for the middle class or the bottom 40 to become owners in a different way, because it's true that you at the beginning just need 20%, but this is similar situation when you have to get a loan for a house. You still need a down payment. So people that are going to invest in this project, in this scheme, they have to be very conscious that in 5 years they need to be ready to pay for the rest of the amount if they want to become owners. So there is a delay of 5 years, but I don't see the financial situation of the average family changing radically in 5 years. Let's say you don't want to risk on a loan now, but you are ready to do so in 5 years. Or your salary is X now, and your salary will be double or triple X in 5 years. I don't see this happening. So if the product would be marketed properly, we will realize that yes, is a help somehow, but not a radical change in the way in which people can become owners of a house.
Earlier, we also spoke about the concern that if you're not careful with the scheme, it could lead to a mortgage crisis similar to the one that hit the US because of too easy lending. Do you agree?
Well, I agree at a certain extent in the sense that the risk of a loan crisis, a banking crisis or mortgages crisis is there, but very much it will depend on the kind of regulations and limitations that eventually the government will accompany when the scheme will be fully implemented. Because, of course, if some investors enter with the 80% and later on they start to develop a secondary market for these shares of homes, then we have the domino risk similar to what happened in the US 10 years ago.
And can you explain to us a little more about the secondary market that you foresee developing?
Yeah, okay. When with this scheme, when the first time buyer buy house pays 20%, okay, this can be with cash or with a loan, and then some other investors need to enter to cover the rest of 80%. And as it was explained, these investors will be owner of a certain share of that property. They put 10%, they will become owner of 10%. What I see as a potential risk is the creation of the market for these shares. Okay, now I buy 10% of this house. I see how the market is going, and eventually, if the market is not going as I was expecting, I start to sell out these 10% or 15% whatsoever. And this can create a chain of owners, of share owners, that is not really clear probably to the original buyer. And this can create difficulties of relationships. And depending how this secondary market is going to develop and how much the involvement of financial institutions will be in this secondary market, this can eventually open the door to a banking crisis. But again, this will very much depend on the kind of institutional framework that the government will decide to accompany to the implementation of the scheme.
And where would you think the money for the scheme will come from?
They can come from financial institutions, but I think this money could come also from developers or from big investors. And here we can have another potential risk that big investors can hoard and invest in a lot of properties, and after 5 years, if the people didn't invest in a prudent way, these big investors will find themselves owning a lot of properties around Malaysia.
So what is the role of the government in all of this?
It seems that there is not an actual and direct involvement of the government on the scheme, but this needs eventually to be clarified. What I hope will be a future involvement of the government is a clear clarification about the institutional framework that will surround the scheme, because we need to have a very clear what is going to happen in all the possible scenarios that will potentially arise after 5 years. So this is something that I really call for a government action in clarifying the rules and regulations around the scheme, because the risks that I just mentioned are real. But the main point that I think is necessary at this moment is not to present the program for what it is not. So it is not true that you become the owner just paying 20%. It's not true that you can buy your dream house just with 20%. This happens only in dreamland. It's not how the reality works. I see this program more similar to the rent-to-home scheme rather than the Dreamland project as it was presented at the beginning. So I think that a careful marketing campaign needs to be redeveloped in order to make the people understanding the kind of step that they eventually do by entering this scheme. So they are not going to buy their property just with 20% of the money. This is very important. And at the same, as a part of the same package, I see an important role for the government in increasing the financial literacy of the people that approach the housing market in order for them to really understand the different projects, the different solutions and schemes that are available, and they don't do what they can't really afford to do.
Carmelo, thank you so much for joining us. That was Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, Senior Fellow at the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs. And we've been asking you for your thoughts. We've had a number of messages come in, and we'll get to those right after this. But in the meantime, we are still asking you, basically, would you participate in FundMyHome? And is home ownership very important to you? Let's see now what Selva has to say. Good evening, Selva. What are your thoughts?
Hey, guys. I'm neither team rent or team buy. I'm team own. I think I just want to have a property or something that's feasible to myself that's under my name. I like their idea, their scheme. It's pretty smart. But, I think it's all in the fine print, isn't it? And, you could own the house for 20%, sure, and in 5 years' time, if it does well, then it's great. You get some profit out of it. Or else the 80% of profit goes to the banks or whatever institution. Mm-hmm. If it's a loss, then you could choose to refinance it, obviously at a higher rate, and the expectation is that you might be earning more in 5 years' time. But I think what they should maybe look at doing is something similar. I'm not sure if they have it, but something similar to what they do with cars nowadays. So, with our younger generation, right, we like to, have flashier things, and it's all about making a statement, having those kind of materialistic properties or whatever it is. And what they do with cars, right? Basically, in US, where you could do this car leasing program, where I could own a BMW, a Ferrari, a Porsche for a minimal rate. Basically, I pay my monthly installment, but it's way much more cheaper. But I don't really own the car. For that 2 to 3 years, I do have the car. The car is under my name. But after that leasing program is done, I have to return the car back to the dealership, and I could choose to continue the program with a new car or something like that. So technically, I do own the car, but I don't really own the car. If they did that with the houses, it might work. So basically, I could own a house for that, say, 5 to 10 years, but I pay a way much more lower monthly installment rate. After that 5 to 10 years, I can either choose to continue paying for that same installment plan, or I sell off that house. I don't make the money. The bank or whoever it is makes that money, and I go on to do it with a new house.
Right.
Because I feel like with this one, it's smart, it's great, but what if in 5 years' time I can't pay back that loan? That's where it all gets a bit messy, I believe. If you could, that's great, Okay. And also another thing, I checked out the website. It's smart, the idea is nice. I'm tempted to do something like that because I'm also just started working, so it will work out well for me as well. But they don't have the houses of my choice. The choices that they have there is very limited, and probably they have done some kind of dealing with these developers lah.
Right.
Fair enough, Selva. Thank you so much for calling and for offering your perspective. I think that's important.
Yeah.
And also, it is important to say people want a say in where they live.
That's true. And I think if the options are limited, then is there really a point to this?
There is a point if you stay where those options are available, then that's great for you. But I think generally speaking, if you're trying to buy in, specific pockets, specific places that are convenient to you, then yeah, maybe this isn't the right time. Let's see what Nash has to say. Good evening, Nash. What are your thoughts?
Hey guys, definitely team buy and own. Mm-hmm. I don't believe in renting because I think generally, right, in Klang Valley or in other states, Properties, if you can look far and wide, you can actually find something that's within your budget. There's definitely a lot of programs like Rumah WIP or Rumah Selangorku, which is targeted towards the middle class or people who are earning a certain bracket. My opinion on FundMyHome, I think it's a very disruptive thing, right? I've been seeing a lot of these kind of fintech solutions for a while now. 2 years back, they had the equity crowdfunding for businesses to raise funding through, crowdfunding. Like normal retail investors can actually pitch in and buy shares, and then they make the money when the business grows or it's sold at a later date or whatnot, right? So definitely it's a new program. Nobody is actually it's an option. It's a good option to have. It is different than our flexi loans for a house or standard loan for the house. Ultimately, it's this, right? What I feel that this solution helps is maybe not necessarily first home buyers. It definitely gives an option for people who are looking to get a second property, because it gives them the leeway of 5 years to either see how much that place appreciates. I think the reason why the choices are limited at this point of time is probably because right now the people who are funding FundMyHome is actually the banks, right? They probably look at a property and see whether it has the capability to appreciate based on maybe public transport which is nearby. So they're de-risking the options for end users, and it's ultimately up to the end users. Nobody is actually pointing a gun to the end users and say, you must take this. It is a good option to have. Might not be for everyone. And I think for normal people, is at the end of the day, this is a private initiative. The government is not putting any of their money into it. But ultimately, you have to read the T&Cs and then decide for yourself.
So do you see this as being helpful to people who want to buy a house to stay in, I suppose, as opposed to buying a house for investment? Is it for people do you see it that way?
I think it's definitely, I think if I were to put a ballpark figure, right, maybe 70% of people who are embarking on this are looking at it as an investment method, right? They're looking at this property as an investment. Post 5 years, if it appreciates and all that, it's a high risk kind of thing, right? Maybe the other 30% probably they're looking at, okay, maybe I want to try this place out, and this is another method. I probably already have a loan that I'm servicing. This could be another method for me to try out and all that. It's not meant for everyone. I think for a lot of people, a lot of education is needed, very similar to equity crowdfunding for businesses. Even that took some time. And also, I think the government has they have put rules and regulation and controls, right, to make this thing viable. Ultimately, that, and also I think you guys should actually call the chairman of the H to explain it more, right? We need to hear it from the horse's mouth. Of the benefits and also maybe the pitfalls that's associated with this program.
All right, Nash, thank you so much for calling and for a suggestion for a guest. We'll look into that. Yeah,
I'm sure it will appear on the Property Show or Breakfast Girl sometime soon.
I would think so, yes.
Yeah, but I think that everything that Nash said, I agree very much. Now, to me, it seems like perhaps then the problem with FundMyHome is with how it's sold, right? Then now they're selling it as it's a scheme to get to home ownership. But now it sounds like, is it an investment scheme instead? Also,
the important thing, as pointed out by Nash, no one's forcing you. It's an option still. Let's see what Joe has to say. Good evening, Joe. What are your thoughts?
Hi. The program just sounds weird to me because I don't know. I think they should have looked into building affordable houses. There's a lot of technology going on, modular houses and all that. Can be erected for a fraction of the cost. I just don't understand why we're still going by the same old route, just trying to play new tricks with it. I don't think it's going to work. I'm 42. I just got my house 2 years ago. So, again, I also don't understand why people are rushing to snap up property that they can't afford. And owning a house is not a joke. So I would say think twice and then think some more.
Joe, thank you for calling. We also have received a lot of messages. They have come in. Thank you so much. We do, however, have to go to the news. Do keep them coming in, though. Send your thoughts through 018-789-8899, and we will get to them after At the Movies, which is coming your way after the news. This is the Evening Edition, BFM 89.9.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my, BFM 89.9, the business station.